Today we're going to have just a discussion around self-care and what self-care means, looks like, is through a neurodiversity lens. So to start off with, what does self-care mean to you? So it can mean a lot of things to different people, but thinking about you, thinking through a neurodivergent kind of sense, what is self-care?
Yeah, so I think for me, self-care means a lot of different things. And I think it wasn't until I necessarily started Frontline, the SI, and then the placement where I kind of got an understanding of the different types of self-care that I needed to do. So I think I had the stereotypical kind of thought that, it was taking time out and just breathing or spending some time with family and things. But being able to kind of navigate that working environment and study with everything that can happen and sensory overload. And I think self-care was about me, my health, and what I needed in order to kind of just cope and get through the day. So whether that was adjustments that I needed in the workplace or adjustments with study, or at the end of the day coming back, taking some time out, skipping, or at weekends going for a walk or spending time with my dog. Yeah, there was lots of different kinds of self-care that I needed to do.
Cool. So it was kind of like I guess, trying to navigate everything, but that kind of consisted of a lot of different things within that. Is that fair enough to say?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it took a lot of kind of self-awareness as well, of knowing not just what I needed, but how to do it and where to go, and being aware of how I was feeling and how I can manage that, and also tell other people how I need to manage that as well.
Yeah, I got at the sort of the struggling with the awareness of it as well. So you were saying about being sort of self-aware with it, and I think part of it for me is stopping and being like, what's actually going on here? Because a lot of the time, so I brought it around to boundaries, and I said as well as self-care being like your exercise, you're prioritizing your own well-being in terms of eating well and doing all of those sort of things that you're kind of sleeping. And I took it around to boundaries and about self-care as being aware of your own boundaries and then communicating them as best you can. And this is why I was sort of made a point of trying to see it as like kind of aspirational self-care, because I don't always do this. But I think you're so used to any neurodivergence, you're so used to having your boundaries consistently overstepped that you're being able to take a moment and be like, oh, this uncomfortable feeling is because they're being completely overstepped. How do I reassert them? How do I recognize them first and then reassert them in this situation? So I'd say that's a constant self-care thing, is finding techniques to sort of communicate boundaries, which is obviously quite difficult to do. And I definitely don't do it always, but every time I have done it, I've been quite sort of pleased with myself.
So what works for you in terms of your own self-care?
I guess for me, it's using self-care as a way to, I've already said self-awareness, but also as a distraction, as an escape, as something to get out frustration, to use as processing time, to to just disassociate sometimes. And self-care for me is doing something that I really enjoy doing, irrespective of what other people think. And it's took a long time, but I put my hands up and go, I love skipping. I love spending time with my dog. I love painting. And it's them things that just give me that opportunity to have a bit of a time out and do something totally different. But also it's kind of, there's positives to it. So by embracing who I am and what I enjoy doing, it's actually given me opportunities to get to know people within the workplace or within the unit, and like skipping or keeping fit or something else. It's something I can channel my passion into as well. It's just a little bit different from what I do in terms of social work, which I'm also passionate about, but you need to have that kind of, is bringing it back to boundaries, something else to kind of switch off sometimes. So yeah.
What works for me in terms of like emotional and social things, like constant processes of self-care, and I went back sort of boundaries again, and communicating them, maybe even using humour to do that, because it can be so difficult to do it directly, and like that as an act of self-care, because you are kind of, it's a bit of self-preservation there, not to, for me anyway, not to be, I just would struggle to be so direct, I think, because I'm so worried about how I come across. I've also sort of thought about having a quiet space to retreat to, but probably quite an obvious one. Taking away decision making where possible. That's and that's sort of hand in hand with having a routine, I guess. But in everything, and in what I'm going to do, and in what I'm going to wear. So I basically like wear variations on the same thing all the time, because I hate having to decide what to wear and worrying what to wear, and then wearing out certain clothes, then they're too worn out and I won't be able to wear them another time. It takes so long to sort of deal with that. And I think that's something that, Summer Institute is good, because everything is planned out for you in this kind of very containing way, which I liked. But then in actual sort of year one, I think creating any sort of structural routine where you can is really, really helpful, because it can be wiped away so quickly.
I wonder if there's something around seeking out others in terms of what we do to kind of to care for ourselves, and I wonder what the ND space that we have, how that maybe fits into an aspect of self-care. What do you think?
With communication, I think it's always been difficult for me, whether that's because of experiences in the past of being neurodivergent and sometimes the perceived communication difficulties, or people taking things the wrong way or stereotyping things, that I've always shied away from communication and from groups. So the fact of having the neurodiversity group, where I actively look forward to it and clicking that link that I'm going to participate in something that involves communication and talking to other people and sharing experiences, has actually been like really liberating for me. And to be with people who just have that general understanding of what you're going through, just a little bit more than what other people in your unit might, or speaking to a friend or a partner, or like my mum, and my mum hears a lot of rants and things, but talking within that group, which is a safe space, and just sharing ideas or talking about literature or what's happening, or even just helping each other, is such a nice thing. And in a process of Frontline that is very academic and full on and emotional and requires so much resilience and energy, the neurodiversity group space has been so much of a help, and just makes you feel like you're not alone. So, and my unit, like having to be open, or previously trying to kind of mask and hide things, having to be open, and embracing being neurodivergent and talking to people, it's given me like the confidence, and the neuro group has just reinforced that a little bit more as well, to kind of be who I am and not have to hide.
The way I've engaged with the neurodiverse space is reading stuff. I feel like I'm just starting to dip my toe myself, but I just, in terms of engagement with other people in that space, I've just been reading everything, whether that's from Instagram accounts to theory, and that's probably been difficult, really, because I don't really have anyone in my own life that sort of properly gets it. More like a sort of seeking out books and the neurodiverse academic space. I know that sounds really sad, but they're like that. It's so interesting, and how they're linking it with all sorts of theories that are relevant to social work. But it's I find all of that really interesting and reassuring, and kind of like a space I'd aspire to be in. But yeah, go to the pub sometimes too, but I just don't talk about anything like this at the pub. So
thank you. So what can others do to promote your self-care? Are there barriers to self-care? And if there are, how can you be supported?
I guess for me, there's emotional and physical barriers. I think people won't know really how to promote my self-care if they don't necessarily know what self-care is generally, and then how it applies to neurodivergent people, and then how it applies to me. And that's like individually. I think it's also me not becoming frustrated with them barriers has took a lot. And I had this expectation that, especially in like social work and local authority environments, where people would automatically know what neurodivergent needs or is, or so I did become frustrated, and it took a lot of kind of self-awareness and understanding and confidence to actually be curious and say what I needed, and to ask for what I needed, as opposed to just either live with what was there or not ask or expect people to give me what I needed. So I guess like once people knew, like my tutor or CSW, and they can also recognise my needs, that took a lot of pressure off. But it did require me to kind of speak and be open about that.
We've come up with a lot of different things and some key themes around self-care, but what would the key messages be that you'd like to share with participants?
I guess with SI is to treat it as a beginning and go in without having any kind of preconceived ideas or expectations. And then I think it's to utilise like the support as well. So to speak to the tutors and like the disability team and get that support in early. Because for me, if I start to get anxious or overwhelmed, it's really hard and takes even more energy to come back from, as opposed to kind of prevent it in the first place.
Yeah, embrace it, have a really good time, go with it all. I loved SI, and I did it in person like this year, and it was really rigorous, but it was so, like as I've sort of said before, everything is planned for you, all this food, all your time, it's so containing. And then everyone is so nice, and then even moments of challenge that happen are made into like learning moments, and they're really interesting. And then you sort of like learn to reflect, which, and everything you're learning is just I found so helpful, like in terms of how I view the world and myself and everything. Yeah, it was like it's a bit like joining a cult, but it's really I thought it was brilliant. So just enjoy it, and do try and, if you can, like build up some friendships there, because that sort of does help you through the 2 years then. But yeah, really, really good.
And then I just think generally it's just Frontline itself. It is hard work, but for me, it's making that difference that makes it worth it, and that I have learned so much. And it's not necessarily just about social work, but life and the people and the skills that I've learned. And I think I've said to you before, Jenny, that I didn't really want to be known as an autistic social worker, that I just wanted to be a social worker with autism, and that I very kind of quickly came to realise that there's nothing wrong at all with being an autistic social worker, or a social worker at Skips, or a social worker who has a dog, and that as social workers, we are just all people, and it's our individuality and our strengths that make us the people that we are. And I guess it's just kind of remembering that, and that Frontline chose us for a reason, and that we kind of have the uniqueness and the skills to make that difference. And when you do start working with families or children, it's them little moments of connectiveness or change, and it's remembering them that gets you through the tough days, but also that you're making a really big difference, and to just kind of be happy.